The scar that ran down Scarlett Foster's left cheek wasn't the worst thing people noticed about her, but it was certainly the most visible reminder that she was ruined goods in the eyes of respectable society. She stood behind the bar of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Pinos Altos, New Mexico territory, wiping down glasses with a practiced efficiency while pretending not to hear the whispers from the miners who crowded the establishment on this hot August evening in 1878. "That one ain't for marrying," old Tom Wilson muttered to his companion, loud enough that Scarlett's ears caught every word. "Pretty face, shame about the scar, but a woman who works in a saloon like this, serving drinks to rough men, well, love ain't for girls like her." Scarlett's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. At 22 years old, she had heard variations of that sentiment her entire adult life. The scar came from a wagon accident when she was 16, the same accident that killed her parents and left her orphaned with nowhere to go. Her aunt had taken her in reluctantly, made it clear she was a burden, and when Scarlett turned 18, she found herself working at the Silver Dollar just to keep food in her belly and a roof over her head. The saloon doors swung open with enough force to make half the patrons look up from their drinks. The man who entered had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, his broad shoulders nearly spanning its width. Scarlett found herself staring despite her best efforts not to gawk at customers. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with muscles that strained against his worn cotton shirt, evidence of a life spent doing hard physical labor in the unforgiving mountains. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. His eyes, a striking shade of green, scanned the room with the wariness of a predator assessing potential threats. "Whiskey," he said when he reached the bar, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Scarlett's chest. "The bottle." She reached for the bottle on the shelf behind her, acutely aware of how his gaze followed her movements. When she set the bottle and a glass in front of him, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt a jolt like static electricity race up her arm. "That'll be $2 for the bottle," she said, meeting his eyes with the professional courtesy she extended to all customers, nothing more and nothing less. He placed the coins on the bar without breaking eye contact, and something in his expression made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't the usual leering appraisal she got from drunken miners, or the dismissive glance of men who considered saloon girls beneath their notice. This man looked at her like he was seeing something everyone else had missed, like the scar on her cheek was just another feature rather than a defining flaw. "What happened?" he asked, nodding toward her face with genuine curiosity rather than morbid fascination. "Wagon accident," she answered curtly, waiting for the inevitable pity or the change in his demeanor that would mark her as damaged. Instead, he simply nodded. "My name is Vincent Grant. I trap and hunt up in the mountains, come down for supplies every few months. Been doing it for near about 8 years now." "Scarlett Foster," she replied automatically, surprised that he was introducing himself like they were at a church social rather than a rowdy saloon. "Welcome to Pinos Altos, Mr. Grant." "Vincent," he corrected, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey. Never had much use for formalities. Before Scarlett could respond, a commotion erupted at one of the card tables. Jack Murphy, a miner with a nasty temper when he'd been drinking, was accusing another player of cheating. The accused man, a drifter who'd been in town less than a week, jumped to his feet with his hand hovering over his pistol. Scarlett's stomach dropped. She'd seen confrontations like this escalate too many times, had cleaned blood off the floorboards more often than she cared to remember. The saloon owner, Silas Pemberton, was upstairs entertaining one of the working girls and wouldn't be any help. "Gentlemen," she called out, injecting as much authority into her voice as possible. "Take it outside if you're going to settle this, but gunplay inside will get you both banned permanently." "Stay out of this, woman," Jack snarled, his bloodshot eyes swinging toward her with open hostility. "This ain't your concern." "It becomes my concern when you're about to put bullet holes in my employer's establishment," Scarlett retorted, coming around the bar despite the warning voice in her head telling her to stay put. Jack's hand moved toward his gun and Scarlett's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd overstepped, let her mouth run ahead of her common sense, and now she was going to pay for it. But before Jack could draw his weapon, Vincent was there, moving with surprising speed for a man his size. He didn't grab Jack's gun hand or make any threatening gesture. He simply positioned himself between Jack and Scarlett, his massive frame creating an immovable barrier. "The lady asked you to take it outside," Vincent said quietly, but there was steel beneath the calm words. "Seems reasonable to me." Jack glared up at the mountain man, clearly calculating his odds. Whatever conclusion he reached made him take a step back, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Fine. Ain't worth the trouble anyway. Cards are probably marked." The drifter grabbed his meager winnings and made a hasty exit, and the tension in the room gradually dissipated as patrons returned to their drinks and conversations. Vincent turned to Scarlett, his green eyes searching her face. "You all right?" he asked. "I've handled worse," she said, more sharply than she intended. She didn't need rescuing, didn't want to feel indebted to anyone, especially not some mountain man who'd probably be gone by morning. "But I appreciate the intervention." Vincent returned to his spot at the bar, and Scarlett busied herself with serving other customers, trying to ignore how her hands trembled slightly from the adrenaline still coursing through her system. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and as closing time approached, the saloon gradually emptied until only a handful of stragglers remained, including Vincent, who nursed his bottle of whiskey with impressive restraint. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" Scarlett asked as she began wiping down tables. "Most folks don't linger this long unless they're too drunk to find the door." "Wanted to make sure you got home safe," Vincent replied, his directness catching her off guard. Man like Jack Murphy, he might be the type to hold a grudge, wait outside in the dark for someone who embarrassed him. "I've been walking home alone from this saloon for 4 years, Scarlett said, though privately she had been worried about exactly that scenario. "I can take care of myself." "Never said you couldn't." Vincent stood, leaving payment for his whiskey on the bar with a generous tip. "But that doesn't mean you should have to." Against her better judgment, Scarlett found herself accepting his offer to walk her home. The August night was cooler than the sweltering day had been, and stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain sky. Her small room was above the general store, accessed by an outside staircase, and the walk took less than 10 minutes. They walked in silence for the first few minutes before Vincent spoke. "How'd you end up in Pino's Altos?" "My parents were heading to California, chasing dreams of opportunity like everyone else," Scarlett said, surprised at how easily the words came. She rarely talked about her past, but something about the darkness and Vincent's steady presence made it easier. "Wagon wheel broke on a steep section of road. They went over the edge. I was thrown clear, got this scar and a broken arm. My aunt came from Santa Fe to collect me, made it abundantly clear I was an inconvenience. Soon as I turned 18, I was on my own. No other family, none that claimed me." Scarlett tried to keep the bitterness from her voice but didn't quite succeed. "My aunt said damaged goods don't fetch good marriage prospects, that I'd be lucky to find any man willing to overlook my face. She suggested I might as well make myself useful serving drinks since no respectable man would want me anyway." Vincent stopped walking, turning to face her with an intensity that made Scarlett's pulse quicken. "Your aunt was a fool," he said bluntly. "That scar doesn't diminish you. If anything, it shows you're a survivor." "That's a nice sentiment," Scarlett said, forcing a laugh to cover how much his words affected her. "But sentiment doesn't change reality. I work in a saloon, I'm scarred, and I have no family or prospects. Love isn't for girls like me." "That's horseshit," Vincent said with such conviction that Scarlett actually flinched. "Sorry for the language, but it is. You're smart, brave enough to stand up to armed drunks, and you've got more strength than half the men I know. Any man with sense would be honored to court you." They had reached her staircase, and Scarlett climbed 3 steps before turning to look down at Vincent. Even with the height advantage, they were nearly eye to eye. "You're very kind, Mr. Grant, but you don't know me. For all you know, I could be exactly what everyone says I am." "Vincent," he reminded her, "and I know what I saw tonight. I know you were willing to risk yourself to prevent bloodshed. I know you work hard and carry yourself with dignity despite folks treating you poorly. That tells me plenty about who you are." Scarlett felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warm night air. "Will you be staying in town long?" "Depends," Vincent said, a hint of something playful entering his expression. "You working tomorrow night?" "Every night except Sundays." "Then I reckon I'll be in town at least a few more days." He tipped an imaginary hat, a gesture that made Scarlett smile despite herself. "Good night, Scarlett Foster." "Good night, Vincent Grant." She watched him disappear into the darkness before letting herself into her tiny room. It wasn't much, just a narrow bed, a small dresser and a wash basin, but it was hers, paid for with her own earnings. She prepared for bed mechanically, her mind replaying the evening's events, particularly those intense green eyes and the absolute certainty in Vincent's voice when he defended her worth. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that before, like her scars and circumstances didn't define her. Like she was worthy of respect, maybe even something more. It was dangerous to hope, Scarlett knew, dangerous to let herself believe that a mountain man who barely knew her could see value where everyone else saw only flaws. He'd be gone soon, back to his mountains and his solitary life, and she'd still be here pouring drinks and deflecting insults. But when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of green eyes and strong hands and a voice that made promises she desperately wanted to believe. True to his word, Vincent appeared at the Silver Dollar the next evening, claiming the same spot at the bar. This time he ordered a beer instead of whiskey and nursed it slowly while watching Scarlett work. His presence made her hyper-aware of herself, conscious of how she moved, how she spoke to customers, how the lamplight caught the scar on her cheek. "You're making my other customers nervous," she said during a brief lull, refilling his glass without being asked. Big silent man staring at people tends to have that effect. "I'm not staring at people," Vincent corrected. "I'm staring at you." The frank admission sent a flutter through Scarlett's stomach. "That's even worse. I'm trying to work." "Then work. I'm just enjoying the view." "Do you always say exactly what you're thinking?" Scarlett asked, exasperated and flattered in equal measure. "Spent too many years alone in the mountains," Vincent said with a shrug that made the muscles in his shoulders bunch impressively beneath his shirt. "Never learned the art of pretty lies and social dancing around the truth. I like looking at you, so I look. I like talking to you, so I talk. Seems simpler that way." Scarlett shook her head but couldn't suppress her smile. "You're an unusual man, Vincent Grant. Been called worse." Over the following week, Vincent became a fixture at the Silver Dollar, arriving each evening and staying until Scarlett finished her shift. He never drank to excess, never caused trouble, and always walked her home afterward. They talked about everything and nothing during those walks. She learned he'd come west after his parents died in a factory fire back in Pennsylvania, seeking open spaces and solitude after the crowded, smoky cities of his youth. He'd found work as a trapper, learning the skills from an old mountain man who'd taken pity on the 19-year-old who didn't know a beaver pelt from a rabbit's skin. "Don't you get lonely?" Scarlett asked one night as they walked beneath a sky so clear the Milky Way looked like a river of stars. Living up there by yourself, weeks or months between seeing another person, Vincent considered the question seriously, as he did most things. "Sometimes. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I chose solitude because I wanted it, needed it for a while. Lately, though," he glanced at her sideways, "I've been thinking maybe too much solitude makes a man forget what he's missing." "What are you missing?" Scarlett's heart beat faster as she asked, not entirely sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Conversation with someone who challenges me. Laughter over shared jokes. The knowledge that someone notices if I come back safe at the end of the day." Vincent stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Connection, I guess. The kind you can't get from a bottle of whiskey in a crowded saloon." They were standing in the shadow of the general store, invisible to any passers-by, and Scarlett felt the world narrow to just the two of them. Vincent raised his hand slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and traced the scar on her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You're so beautiful," he said quietly. "Inside and out. Kills me that people made you think otherwise." "Vincent," Scarlett whispered, not sure what she was asking for, knowing only that something fundamental was shifting between them. He leaned down, and she rose on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, his beard soft against her face and his lips warm and firm. Scarlett's hands found his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath her palms and the steady thunder of his heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said with typical bluntness. "Probably already have. Thought you should know." Scarlett laughed, a shaky sound that was half joy and half terror. "You barely know me." "It's been a week." "I know enough. I know you're kind to drunks who don't deserve it. I know you read penny dreadfuls when you think nobody's watching, and you have a weakness for peppermint candy. I know you hum when you work, and you always make sure old Timothy gets an extra pour because his arthritis is acting up, and the alcohol helps with the pain. I know you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself." Vincent cupped her face in his large hands, careful of her scar. "I know that when I think about my future, you're in it. Have been since the first night I saw you. People are going to talk," Scarlett said weakly, though she made no move to step away. "Mountain man courting a saloon girl, they'll say terrible things about both of us. Let them talk. I don't live my life according to other people's opinions, and I don't want you to either." Vincent's thumbs stroked her cheekbones with devastating tenderness. "I want to court you properly, Scarlett Foster. Want to spend my days looking forward to seeing you and my nights learning everything about you. Want to prove to you that love absolutely is for girls like you, because love should be for everyone brave enough to accept it." Scarlett felt tears prick her eyes, years of believing herself unworthy of affection warring with the hope blossoming in her chest. What if you change your mind? What if you wake up one day and realize everyone was right about me? "Won't happen," Vincent said with absolute certainty. "But if you need time, if you need me to prove it, I will. I'll prove it every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes." "You're serious about this," Scarlett said, wonder threading through her voice. "You really want to court me, more than anything?" Vincent pressed a kiss to her forehead, then her nose, then her lips again, lingering this time. "Say yes, Scarlett. Take a chance on me, on us. I promise you won't regret it." Scarlett thought about all the times she'd been told to know her place, to accept the limitations society placed on her, because of circumstances beyond her control. She thought about the lonely years ahead if she let fear dictate her choices, working at the Silver Dollar until she was too old to stand behind the bar, dying alone with nothing but regrets for company. And she thought about Vincent, this unexpected force of nature who'd walked into her life and refused to see her as anything less than worthy. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes. Court me, Vincent Grant. Show me what I've been missing." The smile that broke across his face transformed him from intimidating to devastating, and when he kissed her again, Scarlett felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. They stood in the shadows for a long time, stealing kisses and making quiet promises, until the church bell tolled midnight and Scarlett reluctantly pulled away. "I need to sleep," she said regretfully. "Busy day tomorrow." "I'll be here tomorrow evening," Vincent promised. "And the evening after that, and the one after that. For as long as you'll have me." The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness Scarlett had never experienced before. Vincent courted her with a single-minded determination that left no room for doubt about his intentions. He brought her wildflowers from the mountains, the kind that grew at high altitudes and bloomed for just a few weeks each year. He fixed the loose board on her staircase without being asked, and replaced the cracked window in her room that had leaked cold air come winter. He sat at the bar every evening, a protective presence that made the rowdier customers think twice before crossing any lines with Scarlett or the other saloon girls. The town noticed, of course. Gossip spread through Pinot's altos like wildfire. Speculation about the mountain man's intentions toward the scarred saloon girl, providing endless entertainment for bored housewives and idle miners. Scarlett heard the whispers, saw the skeptical looks, endured the occasional cruel comment from people who couldn't understand why someone like Vincent would want someone like her. "He's just passing time," one of the saloon girls, a pretty blonde named Mary, said one afternoon. She wasn't being malicious, just stating what she believed to be obvious truth. "Mountain men are like sailors, girl in every port. He'll head back to his cabin come winter and you'll never see him again." Scarlett wanted to argue, to defend Vincent's sincerity, but a small voice of doubt whispered that Mary might be right. What did she really know about Vincent's life in the mountains? Maybe he did have women scattered throughout the territory, lonely girls willing to believe his pretty words. As if summoned by her doubts, Vincent appeared at the saloon earlier than usual that evening. He looked troubled, his jaw tight and his eyes stormy, and Scarlett's stomach dropped. This was it, she thought, the moment when he realized his mistake and prepared to let her down gently before disappearing back into the wilderness. "Can you take a break?" Vincent asked without preamble. "Need to talk to you about something important." Scarlett's hands trembled as she untied her apron and asked the other bartender to cover for her. She followed Vincent outside into the September afternoon, the heat less oppressive than August, but still enough to make sweat bead on her forehead. "Before you say anything," Scarlett began, needing to speak before she lost her nerve, "I understand if you're having second thoughts. I know this has been fun, but you have your life in the mountains and I have my work here, and maybe we got carried away thinking this could be something more permanent." Vincent looked at her like she'd started speaking a foreign language. "What are you talking about?" "You're going to tell me you're leaving," Scarlett said, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. "That this was nice while it lasted, but it's time to move on. I've been preparing myself for it. Scarlett Foster, you are the most aggravating woman I've ever met." Vincent grabbed her shoulders, not roughly but firmly enough to make her look him in the eye. "I'm not leaving you. I'm trying to ask you to marry me, but you keep jumping to the worst possible conclusion. Scarlett's mouth fell open. "What? Marry me," Vincent repeated, slower this time. "Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that love is absolutely for girls like you, because girls like you are the only ones worth loving." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, clearly old but polished to a shine. "This was my grandmother's ring. Only thing I have left from my family. Would be honored if you'd wear it." Vincent, Scarlett's thoughts whirled chaotically, unable to settle on a coherent response. "We've only known each other a few weeks." "I know. Too fast, everyone will say we're crazy." Vincent's grip on her shoulders loosened, became a caress. "But I've lived alone for 8 years, Scarlett. Learned to trust my instincts about what's important and what's noise. And my instincts are screaming that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, that I'd be the world's biggest fool to let you go. So I'm asking, will you take a chance on this crazy mountain man who fell in love with you the moment you stood up to a armed drunk twice your size?" Scarlett looked at the ring, at Vincent's earnest face, at the future he was offering that she'd convinced herself was impossible. Every rational thought told her this was too fast, too risky, that she should be careful and cautious and protect herself from inevitable heartbreak. But her heart, that stubborn organ she'd tried so hard to guard, was singing a different tune entirely. "People will talk," she said softly. "They'll say I trapped you, or that you're making a terrible mistake." "People are always going to talk," Vincent countered. "Question is, do you want to live your life trying to please people who have already decided you're not worth their respect? Or do you want to build something real with someone who sees your true value?" When he put it like that, the answer was obvious. Scarlett looked up at the man who'd walked into her life and refused to accept the limitations everyone else tried to impose on her, and she made her choice. "Yes," she said, and watched pure joy transform Vincent's face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Vincent swept her into his arms, lifting her clean off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed breathlessly. When he set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and Scarlett marveled at how something so simple could feel so momentous. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I didn't think I could, didn't think I should, but I do. I love you so much it scares me." "I love you too," Vincent said against her lips before kissing her deeply, thoroughly, in full view of anyone who cared to look. "And you never have to be scared again, because I'm going to take care of you for the rest of our lives." Planning a wedding in Pinos Altos proved to be an interesting challenge. The town had a small church but no permanent preacher. A circuit minister came through once a month to perform services and handle ceremonies. Scarlett gave notice at the Silver Dollar, enduring Silas Pemberton's grumbling about losing his best bartender, and Mary's continued skepticism about Vincent's intentions. "You're really doing this," Mary said, watching Scarlett pack up her meager belongings from the room above the general store. "Running off to the mountains with a man you barely know." "I know him well enough," Scarlett replied, carefully folding the 2 dresses she owned. "I know he's kind and honest and makes me feel like I matter. That's more than most women get in a marriage." Mary sighed, her pretty face unusually serious. "I hope you're right. I hope he really is different, that he really does love you the way he claims. Lord knows you deserve some happiness after everything you've been through." The wedding took place on the last Sunday of September, in the small church with about a dozen witnesses. Scarlett wore a new dress that Vincent had purchased from the general store, a simple blue cotton that made her eyes look bright and clear. She'd styled her hair as best she could, leaving it down the way Vincent said he liked it, and carried a bouquet of the purple mountain flowers he'd brought her that morning. Vincent stood at the altar looking uncomfortable in clean clothes and a borrowed jacket, his long hair tied back neatly, and his beard freshly trimmed. But when Scarlett walked down the aisle toward him, his expression shifted into something so tender and full of love that she felt tears prick her eyes. The ceremony was brief, the circuit minister rushing through the vows with the efficiency of someone who had several more towns to visit before winter set in. But when Vincent slipped a second ring onto Scarlett's finger, a matching band he'd commissioned from the town's only jeweler, and promised to love and cherish her until death parted them, she knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. "You may kiss your bride," the minister intoned, and Vincent needed no further encouragement. He cupped Scarlett's face in his large hands and kissed her with a passion that made several of the older women in attendance gasp, but Scarlett didn't care. She was married to the man she loved, the man who'd seen past her scars and circumstances to the person beneath, and nothing else mattered. The next morning, they set out for Vincent's cabin in the mountains. It was a 3-day journey on horseback, and Scarlett had to admit she was nervous about her new life. She'd never been more than a few miles from Pinos Altos, had no experience with mountain living or the isolation that came with it. But Vincent was patient, teaching her how to sit her horse properly, pointing out landmarks and explaining the terrain, making her feel included in this world he was welcoming her into. "You're quiet," Vincent observed on the second day as they navigated a narrow mountain trail. "Having regrets already?" "No regrets," Scarlett assured him quickly. "Just thinking about how much my life has changed. A month ago I was pouring drinks and convinced I'd die alone. Now I'm married to you, heading to a cabin in the mountains. It's almost too much to process." "Change can be overwhelming," Vincent acknowledged. "But good change is worth the discomfort. And I promise, Scarlett, I'm going to make sure this is the best change that ever happened to you." The cabin, when they finally reached it late on the third day, was better than Scarlett had dared hope. It was small but sturdily built, nestled in a valley with a clear stream running nearby and mountains rising dramatically on all sides. Vincent had obviously put work into making it comfortable, with a real iron stove for cooking and heating, glass windows instead of just shutters, and a bed frame rather than a pile of furs on the dirt floor. "It's not fancy," Vincent said, sounding uncharacteristically uncertain. "But it's weatherproof and safe. Been meaning to add a second room, maybe a covered porch. Now that you're here, I'll get started on those improvements." "It's wonderful," Scarlett said honestly, looking around at what was now her home. "Better than anything I expected." That night, they consummated their marriage in the bed Vincent had built himself, and Scarlett learned that his gentleness extended to all aspects of his life. He took his time, making sure she felt cherished and desired, murmuring endearments against her skin and treating her like something precious rather than simply convenient. Afterward, wrapped in his strong arms with her head on his chest, Scarlett finally understood what all the romantic novels she'd secretly read had been trying to describe. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked, his deep voice rumbling through his chest beneath her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Scarlett replied truthfully. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing something worth fighting for when everyone else saw only flaws." "Those people were blind," Vincent said fiercely, tightening his arms around her. "You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I'm going to spend every day making sure you know it." Life in the mountains proved to be both harder and more rewarding than Scarlett had anticipated. Vincent taught her how to trap smaller game, how to identify edible plants, how to read the signs of changing weather. She learned to cook over the wood stove, to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter ahead, to maintain the cabin and tend the small garden Vincent had planted near the stream. The isolation that Mary had warned her about never materialized as the problem everyone predicted. Instead, Scarlett found peace in the quiet, joy in the simple rhythms of their days. Vincent worked hard, checking his trap lines and hunting, but he always made time for her, never making her feel like an afterthought or burden. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, played cards by lamplight, made love with a passion that never seemed to fade. When the first snow fell in late November, blanketing the valley in pristine white, Scarlett stood on the newly built covered porch and marveled at the beauty of her surroundings. Vincent came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "Any regrets yet?" he asked, a question that had become something of a joke between them. "Not a single one," Scarlett replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Though I do have some news that might change your answer to that question." Vincent turned her around, green eyes searching her face. "What news?" "I'm pregnant," Scarlett said, watching his expression carefully. They hadn't discussed children, had been so focused on building their life together that the future had seemed distant and abstract. "About 2 months along, I think. Baby should come sometime in early summer." For a moment Vincent just stared at her, and Scarlett felt a flutter of anxiety. Then his face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen, and he picked her up and spun her around just like he had when she'd agreed to marry him. "A baby," he said, wonder threading through his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Scarlett, that's the best news you could have given me." "You're not worried about me giving birth up here so far from town and a doctor?" Vincent set her down carefully, his expression sobering. "I'd be lying if I said the thought didn't scare me, but we'll manage. I'll ride to town in the spring, arrange for a midwife to come stay with us when the time gets close. We'll figure it out together, just like we figure everything else out." The winter passed slowly, the deep snows making travel impossible for weeks at a time. But Vincent had prepared well, and they never lacked for food or warmth. Scarlett's belly grew steadily, and Vincent treated her pregnancy with a mixture of awe and protectiveness that would have been suffocating if it hadn't been so clearly rooted in love. He talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child about the mountains, about the animals they shared the valley with, about the mother who was strong and brave and beautiful. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth so there were no rough edges, and Scarlett sewed tiny clothes from fabric Vincent had stocked up on during his last supply run. Spring came with a rush of melting snow and blooming wildflowers, and Vincent made the journey to Pinos Altos to arrange for the midwife. He was gone for 5 days, the longest they'd been apart since their wedding, and when he returned with an older woman named Margaret Hayes, Scarlett nearly wept with relief. Margaret took one look at Scarlett, now 7 months pregnant and showing considerably, and nodded approval. "You're healthy, that's good. Baby's positioned well. Should be a straightforward birth, barring complications, but it's good I'm here just in case." The midwife settled into their cabin easily, helping Scarlett with the daily chores that had become increasingly difficult, and telling stories of the dozens of babies she delivered over her 30 years of practice. Vincent hovered nervously, clearly out of his element with the women's talk of contractions and afterbirth, but determined to be useful. "Your husband loves you very much," Margaret observed one afternoon while they were shelling peas on the porch, Vincent visible in the distance checking trap lines. "Not all men are so attentive to their wives, especially during pregnancy. He's a good man," Scarlett said simply. "Better than I ever thought I'd find." "Heard the talk in town, you know," Margaret continued, her weathered hands never stopping their work. "People saying he'd leave you, that a mountain man and a saloon girl was a recipe for heartbreak. pleased to see they were wrong. "People have been wrong about me my whole life," Scarlett said, touching the scar on her cheek absently. "Vincent was the first person who looked past the surface to see who I really am." "That's real love," Margaret said with satisfaction. "The kind that lasts. You hold onto that, girl. It's rarer than gold and twice as valuable." Labor began on a warm June evening, starting with a dull ache in Scarlett's lower back that gradually intensified into full contractions. Margaret took charge immediately, sending Vincent to boil water and prepare clean linens while she helped Scarlett into a comfortable position. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day, hours of pain that left Scarlett exhausted and questioning her ability to see it through. But Vincent never left her side except when Margaret specifically ordered him out, holding her hand and letting her squeeze hard enough to bruise, murmuring encouragement and reminders that she was the strongest person he knew. "I can't do this," Scarlett gasped during a particularly brutal contraction, sweat soaking her hair and her body screaming for relief. "You can," Vincent said with absolute certainty. "You're almost there, love. Just a little longer and we'll meet our baby. You can do this." With Margaret's expert guidance and Vincent's unwavering support, Scarlett finally pushed their child into the world as the sun set on the second day. The baby's cry filled the cabin, strong and healthy, and Scarlett collapsed back against the pillows with tears streaming down her face. "It's a boy," Margaret announced, cleaning the infant efficiently before placing him on Scarlett's chest. "Good size, good lungs. You did well, Scarlett." Scarlett looked down at her son, at his tiny face and grasping fingers, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Vincent knelt beside the bed, his own eyes suspiciously wet as he stared at the baby with wonder. "He's perfect," Vincent whispered, gently touching the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers closed around Vincent's thumb, gripping with surprising strength, and Vincent let out a shaky laugh. "Look at him. He's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Scarlett asked, though they discussed several options during the long winter months. "Samuel," Vincent said without hesitation. "Samuel Vincent Grant, Sam for short. What do you think, Samuel?" Scarlett tested the name, looking at her son's face as if trying it on for size. "Yes, Samuel Grant. It's perfect." Margaret stayed for another week, making sure Scarlett recovered properly and teaching both new parents the basics of infant care. Vincent took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, changing Samuel's cloths without complaint and walking the floor with him during fussy nights so Scarlett could rest. "You're a natural," Margaret observed one morning, watching Vincent rock Samuel while simultaneously cooking breakfast one-handed. "Most men won't touch a baby, claim it's women's work." "Most men are fools," Vincent replied, pressing a kiss to Samuel's downy head. "This is my son. Taking care of him isn't work. It's a privilege." After Margaret returned to Pinot's Altos, loaded down with payment in the form of furs and smoked meat, Scarlett and Vincent settled into the rhythms of parenthood. The days were exhausting, filled with feedings and diaper changes, and the constant vigilance that came with caring for a newborn, but neither of them would have traded it for anything. Samuel grew quickly, thriving in the mountain air, and as he developed his own personality, Scarlett saw traces of both parents in his features. He had Vincent's green eyes and her darker hair, Vincent's easy temperament and her stubborn determination. Watching Vincent with their son, seeing the gentle giant of a man reduced to baby talk and silly faces, Scarlett fell in love with her husband all over again. The years passed in a blur of happiness Scarlett had never imagined possible. Samuel learned to walk, then run, then climb everything in sight, giving his parents countless heart attacks as he explored their valley with fearless curiosity. Vincent taught him to track animals, to identify plants, to respect the wilderness that was their home. Scarlett taught him to read from the few books they owned, to do arithmetic, to be kind and fair in his dealings with others. When Samuel was 3, Scarlett found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and when their second son was born in the spring of 1882, they named him Thomas, after Vincent's father. Thomas was different from Samuel, more reserved and thoughtful where his older brother was boisterous and outgoing, but the two boys were inseparable, the best of friends despite their differences. Vincent expanded the cabin to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 small bedrooms and a proper kitchen. He built furniture with the same meticulous care he brought to everything, making sure his family had comfort and security. During the winters when trapping was best, he made the journey to Pinos Altos to sell furs and buy supplies, always returning laden with treats for the boys and small gifts for Scarlett, proof that he was thinking of them even when duty called him away. On a warm summer evening in 1885, Scarlett stood on their porch watching the boys play near the stream while Vincent checked the garden. Samuel was now 7, Thomas 4, and she was 6 months pregnant with their third child. Her life bore no resemblance to the one she'd lived before Vincent walked into the Silver Dollar, and she felt gratitude wash over her in waves. Vincent joined her on the porch, sliding an arm around her expanded waist and pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How wrong everyone was," Scarlett said softly. "How they told me love wasn't for girls like me, that I should accept my limitations and be grateful for whatever scraps of affection I could get, and how you proved them all wrong, every single day for 7 years now." 8, Vincent corrected. "Met you 8 years ago this month, and I didn't prove anyone wrong, love. I just saw what was always there, what everyone else was too blind to notice. You were always worthy of love, always deserving of everything good life has to offer. I just got lucky enough to be the one who recognized it." Scarlett turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd given her everything she'd never dared to dream of having. His hair was longer now, shot through with a few strands of silver at the temples, and his beard had filled in more over the years. But his eyes were the same, that piercing green that had seen her true worth from the very beginning, and his arms were just as strong, just as capable of making her feel safe and cherished. "I love you," she said, the words as easy now as breathing. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for showing me what my life could be." "I love you too," Vincent replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I'll keep proving it every day for the rest of our lives. That's a promise I intend to keep." Their third child, a daughter they named Sophie after Scarlett's mother, was born in October of 1885. She was tiny and delicate compared to her brothers, with Vincent's coloring and Scarlett's facial features, including a small birthmark on her left cheek that made Scarlett's heart ache with love and fierce protectiveness. Vincent was hopelessly smitten from the first moment he held her, and Samuel and Thomas appointed themselves her guardians, always making sure their baby sister was safe and happy. As the children grew, Vincent and Scarlett made occasional trips to Pinos Altos, wanting the children to have some exposure to society beyond their isolated valley. The town had grown over the years, new businesses opening and old faces disappearing as people moved on in search of better prospects. But the core remained the same, and there were still those who remembered when Scarlett had worked at the Silver Dollar, who had predicted her marriage would end in disaster. On one such trip, when Sophie was 2 and the boys were 9 and 6, They ran into Mary outside the general store. The former saloon girl had married a shopkeeper and had 2 children of her own, and while she seemed content enough, there was a weariness around her eyes that spoke of dreams deferred. "Scarlett Grant," Mary said, taking in Scarlett's well-made dress and the gold ring that had never left her finger. "Look at you, all prosperous and respectable. I have to admit I never thought it would last." "I know," Scarlett said without rancor. "A lot of people didn't." Mary looked at Vincent, who stood nearby with Sophie on his shoulders and the boys flanking him like protective wolves. "He really loves you, doesn't he? It's not an act, not him biding his time until something better comes along." "He really loves me," Scarlett confirmed. "And I love him. We built a good life together, exactly like he promised we would." "You were luckier than most," Mary said, and there was no bitterness in her voice, just simple acknowledgement of fact. "Most women like us, we don't get fairy tale endings. We get whatever we can manage and call it good enough." "It wasn't luck," Scarlett said gently. "It was choice. Vincent chose to see my worth when others didn't. I chose to believe him, to take a risk on something everyone said was impossible. We chose each other every day, and that's what made the difference." After Mary walked away, Vincent came over and handed Sophie to Scarlett so he could load their supplies onto the wagon. "You all right?" he asked, always attuned to her moods. "More than all right," Scarlett assured him. "Just thinking about how different my life could have been if you hadn't walked into that saloon 8 years ago. How easy it would have been to let fear and doubt talk me out of taking a chance on you." "But you didn't," Vincent said, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands, careless of who might be watching. "You were brave enough to believe in us, in what we could build together. That's one of the many reasons I love you." They stayed in town for 2 days, getting supplies and allowing the children to socialize with other young people. But Scarlett was relieved when they finally loaded up the wagon and headed back to their valley. The mountains were home now in a way that Pinot's altos had never been, and she was eager to return to the peace and privacy of their cabin. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, inheriting Vincent's skill with tracking and trapping. Thomas was quieter but clever, showing an aptitude for numbers and business that suggested he might one day seek a different life than his father's. Sophie was fearless and stubborn, keeping up with her brothers no matter how they tried to leave her behind, and both Scarlett and Vincent knew she would be a force to reckon with when she grew up. In 1892, when Scarlett was 36 and Vincent 42, they welcomed their 4th and final child, another son they named David. He was unexpected but no less loved, and his arrival completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. The older children doted on their baby brother, and Vincent joked that he was finally outnumbered by his offspring. 4 children, Scarlett mused one evening after all the little ones were finally asleep. "When I was pouring drinks at the Silver Dollar, I never imagined I'd have 1 child, let alone 4. A whole family, a real family that chose to love me." "We didn't choose to love you in spite of who you are," Vincent said, pulling her close on the porch where they'd spent countless evenings watching the sun set behind the mountains. "We love you because of who you are. The woman who's strong enough to survive tragedy, brave enough to stand up for herself, kind enough to see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. That's the woman I fell in love with, and that's the mother our children adore." "You have a way with words," Scarlett said, tilting her face up for a kiss. "For a mountain man who claims to speak his mind without artifice." "Only with you," Vincent murmured against her lips. "Only ever with you." As their children grew older, Vincent began teaching Samuel and Thomas the full scope of his trapping business. taking them on longer expeditions into the mountains and showing them the routes and techniques that had sustained their family for years. Sophie, not content to be left behind because of her gender, insisted on learning too, and Vincent, who'd never been able to deny his daughter anything, taught her everything he taught her brothers. David, the baby, showed signs of following in Sophie's fearless footsteps, climbing before he could properly walk and showing no fear of the wildlife that occasionally wandered near their cabin. Scarlett watched her children grow and thrive, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful in its intensity. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Scarlett with a trip to Santa Fe, arranging for Samuel, now 16 and responsible enough to watch his younger siblings for a few days. It was the first time they'd been truly alone together since Samuel's birth, and Scarlett felt almost giddy at the prospect of uninterrupted time with her husband. Santa Fe was overwhelming after so many years in the mountains, crowded and noisy and bustling with activity. But it was also exciting, full of shops and restaurants and luxuries Scarlett had almost forgotten existed. Vincent bought her a new dress, deep green silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and took her to a fancy restaurant where they ate food neither of them could pronounce, but both enjoyed immensely. "Thank you for this," Scarlett said as they walked through the plaza in the evening, the air cooling to a comfortable temperature. "I love our life in the mountains, love our children, but it's nice to remember we're more than just parents sometimes." "We're partners," Vincent agreed. "Lovers, best friends, all of it. The children are important, but so is making sure we nurture what brought them into being in the first place." That night in their hotel room, they made love with the passion of newlyweds, taking their time to relearn each other's bodies without the constant awareness of children in nearby rooms. Afterward, wrapped in expensive sheets in a soft bed, Scarlett traced the scars Vincent had accumulated over 15 years of mountain living. "I was so scared when I married you," she confessed quietly. "Terrified that everyone was right, that you'd realize you'd made a mistake and leave me. Or that you'd stay but come to resent me, wish you'd chosen differently." "Never happened," Vincent said firmly. "Not once, not for a second. You're the best decision I ever made, Scarlett. Everything good in my life stems from the day I walked into that saloon and saw you standing up to men twice your size. That's when I knew you were special, knew I wanted to be part of your life." "You changed everything," Scarlett said, feeling tears prick her eyes even after all these years. "Gave me a family, a home, proof that I was worth loving. I don't think I can ever thank you enough for that." "You thank me every day," Vincent assured her. "Every time you smile, every time you laugh with our children, every time you choose to stay with me when you could have an easier life somewhere else. That's thanks enough." They returned to their cabin after 3 days, laden with gifts for the children and renewed in their commitment to each other. The children mobbed them upon their return, all talking at once about the adventures and mishaps that had occurred in their absence, and Scarlett felt her heart swell with love for this chaotic, perfect family they'd created. The years marched steadily forward, bringing changes both subtle and dramatic. Samuel fell in love with a girl from Pinos Altos, a rancher's daughter named Emma, who was as practical and hardworking as he was. Vincent and Scarlett gave them their blessing and attended a wedding that felt both joyous and bittersweet, marking as it did the beginning of Samuel's own adult life. Thomas, true to his nature, announced at 18 that he wanted to study business in Denver, to learn about commerce and economics in ways that would help mountain communities thrive. It was harder to let him go than it had been to see Samuel marry, but Vincent and Scarlett supported his dreams, using savings from years of careful trapping to fund his education. Sophie grew into a beautiful, fierce young woman who declared she had no interest in marriage, preferring to spend her time exploring the mountains and helping her father with his trap lines. Scarlett saw echoes of her own younger self in Sophie's independence and determination, and loved her daughter all the more for it. David, the baby who wasn't a baby anymore, showed talents in both his father's practical skills and his mother's book learning, a bridge between the different paths his siblings had chosen. He talked about becoming a forest ranger, someone who could protect the wilderness while helping people learn to live within it sustainably. On a crisp autumn evening in 1907, Scarlett and Vincent celebrated their 29th wedding anniversary on the porch they'd shared for so many important conversations over the years. Their children were grown now. Samuel married with 3 children of his own, Thomas building a successful business in Denver, Sophie still living at home and showing no signs of leaving, and David preparing to attend ranger training in the spring. "We did good," Vincent said, his hair now more silver than dark and his face weathered by decades of mountain weather. "Raised 4 good children, built a life worth living. Can't ask for more than that." "I never imagined any of this," Scarlett confessed, settling into the curve of his arm with the ease of long practice. "When you walked into that saloon 29 years ago, if someone had told me I'd end up here, with you, with this family and this life, I would have thought they were insane." "Best kind of insane," Vincent said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "The kind where impossible things become real because people are brave enough to try." "You made me brave," Scarlett said softly. "Made me believe I deserved more than what everyone told me to accept." "That was your gift to me, Vincent Grant, even more than the love and the family and the home. You gave me permission to want more, to believe I could have it." "You always deserved it," Vincent corrected. "I just refused to let you keep pretending you didn't. Stubbornness has its uses." Scarlett laughed, the sound carrying across the valley they'd made their own. "Stubborn is right. Most stubborn man I ever met, refusing to accept that love wasn't for girls like me." "That's because it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard," Vincent replied. "Love is for everyone, but especially for girls like you. Girls who survive and thrive despite everything trying to keep them down. Girls who have the courage to risk their hearts when everyone tells them it's foolish. Girls who make stubborn mountain men fall completely, irrevocably in love." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged one by one in the clear mountain sky. Inside the cabin, Sophie was reading by lamplight, and in the distance they could hear David chopping wood for the winter stores. It was peaceful, perfect, exactly what Scarlett had never known she wanted until Vincent showed her it was possible. "No regrets?" Vincent asked, the question that had become their touchstone over the years. "Not a single one," Scarlett replied, the answer that was always true. "You." "Only that I didn't find you sooner," Vincent said. "But I'll take the 29 years we've had and the ones still to come. They're worth more than gold, more than anything else I could have chosen." As the years continued to pass, Vincent and Scarlett settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long, well-lived life. Their children brought grandchildren to visit, filling the cabin with laughter and chaos that reminded them of when their own brood was young. Samuel's children inherited their grandfather's love of the mountains, while Thomas's son showed the same head for business his father possessed. Sophie eventually did marry, choosing a fellow trapper who understood her independent nature, and their daughter was as fierce and fearless as her mother. Vincent's hair turned fully white, and his movements became slower, more careful, but his love for Scarlett never wavered. He still brought her wildflowers in the spring, still kissed her every morning like it was their first day married, still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. The scar on her cheek had faded over the years, barely visible now, but Vincent still traced it sometimes with gentle fingers, a reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends who'd made the journey to their mountain home, Scarlett stood before the gathered crowd and raised a glass in toast. 40 years ago, I was told that love wasn't for girls like me, she began, her voice still strong despite her 62 years. I was told that my circumstances, my appearance, my work, all of it made me unworthy of the kind of love everyone else seemed to take for granted. And I believed it, accepted it as truth, until this man, she gestured to Vincent, who sat watching her with undisguised adoration, walked into a saloon and decided to spend his life proving everyone wrong. She paused, looking around at the assembled faces, at the family and life they'd built together. He showed me that love absolutely is for girls like me, for anyone brave enough to accept it and strong enough to nurture it. He gave me everything I never dared to dream of having, and then he gave me more. So here's to Vincent Grant, the most stubborn, loving, wonderful man I've ever known, and to 40 more years if we're lucky enough to get them. The gathering erupted in cheers and well wishes, but Vincent only had eyes for Scarlett. He stood, joints creaking slightly after decades of hard mountain living, and pulled his wife into his arms. "I love you," he said simply. "Today, tomorrow, forever. That's my promise, same as it was 40 years ago." "And I love you," Scarlett replied, tears streaming down her face without shame. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." They kissed, heedless of their audience, two people who defied expectations and built something lasting and true. Around them, their family celebrated, proof positive that love was indeed for girls like Scarlett Foster Grant, that it always had been, waiting for the right man to recognize it. The celebration continued long into the night, with music and dancing and stories told and retold, until everyone knew them by heart. Vincent danced with Scarlett under the stars, moving slowly to a tune only they could hear, and Scarlett felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible all those years ago, when she was just a scarred saloon girl convinced she'd die alone. As the last guests departed and their children settled down for the night in various corners of the expanded cabin, Vincent and Scarlett stood on their porch one more time, looking out at the mountains that had been their home for 40 years. "Think we'll get another 40?" Scarlett asked, only half joking. "Don't see why not," Vincent replied. "Grant men are famously stubborn, and you're too tough to let something like age slow you down. Figure we've got plenty of time left." But even if they didn't, Scarlett thought as they made their way to bed, even if this was all they got, it would be enough. More than enough. She'd been told love wasn't for girls like her, but Vincent had spent 40 years proving that wrong with every action, every word, every choice he made. He'd shown her that love was for everyone willing to fight for it, to believe in it, to nurture it through good times and hard ones. She'd been told she was unworthy, but Vincent had made her feel like a queen. She'd been told to accept limitations, but Vincent had shown her a world of possibilities. She'd been told she'd die alone, but Vincent had given her a family, a legacy, a life filled with love and purpose and joy. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the same way they'd slept for 40 years, and Scarlett's last thought before drifting off was gratitude. Gratitude for the stubborn mountain man who'd refused to accept society's verdict on her worth, who'd seen past scars and circumstances to the person beneath, who'd spent his life proving that love was absolutely, unequivocally for girls exactly like her. Vincent and Scarlett were blessed with several more years together, years filled with the quiet contentment of a life well lived. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated new marriages and births, and took pride in the legacy they'd created. The cabin in the mountains remained a gathering place for the family, a symbol of what two people could build when they refused to accept the limitations others tried to impose. When Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by family, Scarlett grieved deeply, but without regret. He'd given her 51 years of unwavering love, proving every single day that she was worthy, that she mattered, that love was absolutely meant for girls like her. His last words to her had been the same promise he'd made on their wedding day. "I love you today, tomorrow, forever." Scarlett lived another 5 years after Vincent's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the mountain man who'd changed her life, making sure the younger generations understood the power of choosing love even when the world says it's impossible. She never remarried, never even considered it, because Vincent Grant had been her great love, her once-in-a-lifetime chance at happiness, and she'd taken it with both hands and never let go. When Scarlett Foster Grant passed away in her sleep at 83, Sophie found her with a smile on her face and Vincent's wedding ring clutched in her hand. The entire family gathered for her funeral, 3 generations of Grants who existed because 2 people had been brave enough to defy expectations and build something lasting. They buried her next to Vincent in a spot overlooking the valley they'd loved. And if you visit that place even now, you can see the markers side by side, testament to a love that refused to be diminished by society's narrow definitions. The inscription on Scarlett's marker, chosen by her children, reads simply, "She was told love wasn't for girls like her. She proved them wrong." And beneath that, in smaller letters, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she lived fully, loved completely, and left the world better than she found it." The cabin still stands, maintained by the Grant family as a reminder of where they came from, of what's possible when people choose love over fear, hope over despair, action over resignation. And sometimes, on quiet mountain evenings, locals swear they can see 2 figures on the porch, a tall man with silver hair and a woman with a faint scar on her cheek, standing together and looking out at the mountains they called home, proving even in death that love, real love, is for everyone brave enough to accept it.